Lesson 124, Percents and Fractions. Today we are going to be looking at the relationship between percents and fractions, and we're going to be focusing on changing fractions into percents. Now we already did a little bit of this in previous lessons, where you had a fraction that looked like this, a number that is over 100, or a number being compared to 100, and we learned that if your denominator is 100, you can simply write the numerator as a percent. 47 over 100 is the same thing as 47%. That's nice and easy. But what we're going to be spending some time looking at today is fractions that look like this, ones that don't have 100 as the denominator. We can't just look at them and write the percent. And we're going to go over two ways that you can change fractions like these ones into percents. And the first method that we are going to use is proportion. So what we're going to want to do is make this fraction into a fraction that has 100 as its denominator, because then we can just look at the numerator and then write a percent behind whatever number the numerator is. Nice and simple. So you set up a proportion just like we've been doing, but make sure that your denominator is 100. And then for this first example, we've got a nice easy number. 50 multiplies very nicely into 100, 50 times 2, which means we multiply our numerator by 2 as well. We get 12 over 100, which is equivalent to 12%. Nice and simple. However, not all denominators are going to be that simple. 8 is an example. Oh, that's a 100. It kind of looks like a 6, but it's a 0. So 8 you can't multiply as nicely as 50 into 100. So you have to use what you know about cross products and proportions. We've done this for a few days already. So remembering that 3 times 100 gets you 300. So 8 times the missing number should also get you 300. So in order to find out what that missing number is, you simply take 300 and you divide it by 8. So 8 doesn't go into 3, but 8 goes into 30. 3 times 8 is 24. We do our subtraction. We bring down our 0. 8 goes into 67 times. 7 times 8, 56. We end up with a remainder of 4. Now remember, in order to change this into a decimal, you simply add a decimal 0 so that you can bring that down, but don't forget to put your decimal up in your answer as well. Now 8 goes into 45 times. 5 times 8 gets us a 40, remainder 0. So our missing number is 37.5, which means 3/8 is equal to 37.5%, because as soon as you have it over 100, you can just use the numerator as your percent. So that's one method, is setting up a proportion with a fraction that has 100 as the denominator. There is another method that you can use, and this is the method that you would use if you get a test back in class and you want to calculate the percent. You would go on your calculator and you would take the top number of the fraction and divide it by the bottom number. All right, so we can take 6 over 50 and do 6 divided by 50. All right, now you have to remember, I mentioned it earlier, we have to add a decimal and a 0 in order for this to work. So 50 can't go into 6, but 50 can go into 60. So 50 goes into 60 one time. We subtract, we end up with a 10. We can add another 0. 50 goes into 100 twice, and then that divides evenly. Okay, but what's really important about the division method is that you remember that what you end up with up here is actually the decimal form of the percent, right? With the proportion method, we found that our final answer was 12%. Here we have 0.12 or 0.12. So you have to remember what we used in the last lesson, which is to convert a decimal to a percent. You simply multiply 100, or you can just think of it as bumping the decimal. So we end up with an answer of 12%. Don't just put a percent sign behind whatever decimal you come up with. And this will work the same way for 3/8. You do your 3 divided by 8. 8 can't go into 3, so we have to make this into a decimal. Uh-oh. Don't know what happened there. 8 can't go into 3, but it can go into 30. And it goes 3 times into 30. 24, you do your subtraction, you get a 6. Keep adding zeros as long as you need to. 7 times 8, 56. End up with a 4. Bring down another 0. And then it ends up dividing like that. So you have 0.375, but you have to remember to convert that decimal into its percent form. So you take your 0.375, you bump your decimal twice, and it ends up being 37.5%. So both methods will get you the same answer. You might choose different methods depending on the question. Like for instance, the proportion method for a number like 6/50, where it's really, really easy to convert it into a denominator of 100, I'd probably choose the proportion method. It's quite a bit faster, fewer steps to figure it out. But for something like 3/8, well, I suppose you do long division for both of them. So you could choose either one of those, and it would probably take you about the same amount of time. So those are the two different ways. You will be asked to practice both in your exercises. So make sure you're paying attention to both, and don't forget for the division method to change it into the decimal into a percent, and you shouldn't run into any problems.